This is the Kingdom Movement Podcast, a place where we will explore, through conversation, how discipleship, theology, and community really can transform our world. Hey guys, this is Jake Johnson and Paulo Mendes here for our very first official Kingdom Movement podcast episode. We're super excited to get started, and we have a special, but not special because we're going to have her on multiple times, guest with us, S.1, and we're super excited to start kind of our first series, which is going to be about our core values as Kingdom Movement, which is worship, family, and mission. So we're going to start with the topic of worship. But first, I'll let these guys say hello to you.
Yes. Hello, guys. Here we are.
Hi, everyone.
So we're super excited. We kind of have some questions that we're going to kick this conversation off with, talking about worship. So I think the best way to start is to begin with the question of how would you guys define worship? I feel like worship, actually, before we even started this podcast episode or recording, Paulo, you even said this is probably one of the harder ones to define, to make a clear definition. So I think that's why it's good to have a conversation to get maybe our thoughts thinking in new and creative ways on how we can define worship. But I'll hand it over to you guys. Maybe share your initial thoughts. I don't know which one you want. Tshiamo over here is looking nervous, so we'll make her go first.
When it comes to worship, I think there's a lot of things to cover when speaking about it, because there's the sitting in a room singing and all that aspect of it, and then there's a heart part of it. So every time I think of worship, I think of a heart posture, so where my heart is, or where somebody's heart is in everything that they do, because you're worshiping in spirit and in truth, so you're trying to do everything you're doing from a heart that is pure. I don't know if that I hope.
No, that's great. Actually, that's a great perspective, I think, to start it off in the sense of our heart, whatever it's looking towards, in a sense, is what we're worshiping.
Yeah.
That's what I'm hearing you say. Yeah. How about for you, Paulo?
Oh yeah, this is a hard one for me. But yeah, I just feel like worship it's a state. I feel like it's more than anything. It's a state. It's a position that we put us as children, as people who belong to this God who loves us. So it's a state that we put us to kind of gratefully, but also just put our heart, say, "Hey Lord, we're here. We love you, and we want to be part of whatever you're doing, and we want to give back whatever we can," which is our heart, which is the thing that we can. God gave us to us, as Tshiamo was saying. So we're just saying, hey, whatever we have, we want to give it to you. So that's how I define it.
Well, we kind of went into this conversation just ready to have a conversation, but I think already that's a great anchor to start at, which is this idea of heart posture. Because I think when you talk about worship, or when you in the Bible, there's idols, right? And God would get mad at his people for worshiping idols versus worshiping him. But really, what was the problem with that? Let's say, why was God so upset? Okay, why couldn't they just go burn some incense over here? But I think it's the idea of who do you trust to organize, to empower, to help your life in whatever you worship. So when I think of the interactions I've had on campus so far, one of the biggest conversations that usually always gets brought up at some point is money. I've sat down and asked someone before, the question when I'm getting to know them, what is your goal in life? What do you want to see happen? Because I think all of us have something that we're aiming for. And a lot of times the response will be to make money, and I think behind that is this desire to have security, right? To have comfort, to have something maybe they didn't have before, or to continue to have what they've grown up in. But it's this definition of money is what gets me what I need, right?
Yeah.
And not to pick on those people, but in a way that is a heart posture to say that money is the thing that can provide what I need to have the life that I want.
Yeah.
And in a way, that's why in the Bible it says, you can't worship God and money. Jesus makes a very strong distinction with money. And I think the reason being is because money is such an easy thing to fall into for security. And the heart posture becomes like, what are you worshiping in order to bring that security? But yeah, what do you guys think?
Yes, and just like one thing I was just thinking, I don't want to sound rude, but I just feel like whenever we are worshiping something that it's not God, we're kind of fooling ourselves,
Yeah.
because most of the things, those things are things that we can never control, For example, like money, you can try hard, you can work hard, to get all that money and everything, but what happened is more than us controlling that thing comes and control us,
Yeah.
So we have to base everything, even our marriage, in that life of just making enough money, making as much money as we can, So while worshiping God, it's not about control. It's just about you giving up control,
Yeah.
You're giving like the only thing that I have, which is my body, which is my heart, I'm giving it back to you, God. And then God coming and through that giving us control, So I just feel like there's this twist.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts you want to add to that?
Not really. I think it's a thing of very often we don't realize how much we idolize it.
Yeah.
How much we worship it and stuff. So you are like, oh, I trust in God, but at the back of your mind, if he gives me money, or if he gives me this, if he gives me things that will make me want to worship him.
Yeah.
Because very often it's like this, I think it's a blurred line between worshiping God because you want to, or worshiping God because you want something from him.
Yeah, our team makes fun of me a lot. So Vanessa and I watched this goofy show on Netflix called Married at First Sight. Paula's already laughing. But bro, even though it's like a reality TV show, kind of drama filled, whatever, it's funny how many ways the Lord has spoken to me through these people trying to work out marriage, because marriage is such a picture of God's love for us and our love for him. And like seeing these people try to put that into action without ever knowing each other is just kind of funny. So the premise of the show is basically these people get married. They've never met each other. They don't meet each other till the day they get married. So like they get married and then it's basically doing the reverse. They have to find out about each other afterwards. But it's funny. The reason why I'm bringing that up is in the show, so many of these people's perspective, even going into marriage, is what can you give me? Marriage is about what can I get out of you and what can you get out of me, rather than coming to a place and saying, what can I give to you, right? How can I love you better? And I get the premise of the show is like these people don't even know each other. But it just reveals how selfish we really can be in our heart of hearts, that at the end of the day, are we willing to say, God, I trust you regardless of what, if it benefits me personally? Because you are the creator, you're the one that made me, you're the one that loves me. I trust, like Jesus says at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, look at the birds of the field, or the birds of the air and the lilies of the field. Like they don't, go to work every day 9 to 5, but they know that God's gonna take care of them, and he says, how much more does God care about you? And Paulo, I think you brought up a really good idea of this, we fixate on like, can God give us what we want? But when we go before him, it no longer becomes, God, will you fix my agendas? And because I think that's the root of it, right? We want God to fit into our agendas for our lives, rather than saying, God, what is your agenda for my life, right? And that may mean you don't get to drive the Mercedes Benz. You know what I'm saying? But God will provide other things that maybe you didn't imagine for yourself before, right?
And I just feel like one thing that I've just realized is that it's a long, kind of hard process, But what happened is once you get to God and say, hey, God, like you with honest heart, and just like with a worship heart, yes, it would be hard because he will tell you, hey, maybe this and this and this way is not what I want you to do, you know. But I just feel like slowly he will just start showing you how all these things really don't matter, you know. I know, like, saying this, you know, out loud, you know, and out there, you know, people might be cringing, like, is that actually true, you know? But I just feel like the fact that we have heard this so much, you know, that says something, you know. And I've learned that, you know, that sometimes we have dreams and then God will come and teach us, you know, that those dreams are not as important as we think they are.
Yeah.
And that's a sacrifice.
Definitely. Yeah, I think this whole concept even too, you know, like, this isn't the magic formula, right? Like, do what God wants and then you get even better than what you thought, right? I don't think it works that. The Bible is full. Jesus promises that if you follow him, there will be blessing, but there's also suffering, right? That you share. Part of being a Christian, Christ-like, is to bear the world's brokenness and suffering in yourself, like Christ bore it, so that you can bring healing to the world, right? And maybe we'll get into that as a part of worship. But something for me, like, I'll just use relationships as an example in my own life. That before I came to Botswana the first time, like back in 2016, one of the big, like, challenges I had was, like, letting go of trying to make a relationship happen for myself, right? And that it even almost prevented me from coming the first time. But I finally got to the point and said, like, Lord, I know this is what you want me to do. So if I do it, I'm trusting that you're going to provide what I desire, right? In your timing. So I'm handing it to you, God. Like, I'm no longer going to try and make this happen for myself. I'm going to trust in you. And what's funny is, before I even left, that's when I ended up meeting Vanessa. You know what I mean? But it was the heart posture, what we've been talking about, shifted from, I got to make this happen, God, and I just want you to approve it. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to make it happen, then I want you to tell me it's okay to, God, I trust you in this area of my life, and I trust that you'll provide what I need. And I know, Paulo, from your own testimonies that you've shared, there are moments, your career especially.
Even coming here, just feel like being here in Botswana for me was just really draining, you know, and humbling experience, you know, just having the dream and knowing that God called me to come here. And then you have to be, you know, patient. You have to wait for God's time to get here, you know, because I was supposed to come with you guys, you know? And then it changed. I was supposed to come with Amanda and the leader, and then it changed. I was supposed to come a month after that, you know, and then it just kept changing, you know, and I was just feeling really frustrated, like, come on, God, what's going on, you know? But it slowly humbled me, you know. And I got here, I just feel like I got here in the perfect time, you know, the beginning of the semester, you know, and I met these amazing people.
Yeah. And, you know, even from my selfish long-term vision, you know, now that Amanda and Alita are departing, at least for a little bit, like, that would have left just Vanessa and I. And if you would have come with them, your year would have been up at the same time. So it's like having you here as a third person to help on the team for that extra bit even is just a huge blessing. I don't know, is there an example for you that you feel like you want to share? I'm putting you on the spot, but if not, it's okay.
No, not yet.
Okay, no worries. So I think we can maybe move on to the next question, which is, why do you think worship has such an impact on people? So, you know, we can keep it in the realm of, like, when there is we talk about, like, a powerful worship service, or we say, like, wow, the Lord's presence was in the room. You know what I mean? Like, what do you think it is that makes people say that? You get what I'm saying? Like, why do you think? Because there is a shift in the room, right? And some people may say, oh, it's just emotions, or it's just this or that. But, like, there's something about going into a space and really handing over control to God and saying, what do you want to say to me? And people walk out different, you know what I mean? So, yeah, what are your guys' thoughts on that, if you have any? They're looking at each other.
For me, the thing why I'm looking at you is, this is one question that I might need to formulate a little bit, you know, because of the I always thought of worship, not that I'm saying it's not a group thing, you know, but for me, every time I go to worship, you know, I I'm thinking about worship, most of the times, even it's like kind of personal thing. Even when I'm with this group of people, it's kind of me, kind of putting myself in that situation, in the situation of worship, and then everybody else putting themselves in the situation of worship, and then all together we just come and for some reason, with us doing that, God comes and moves, which is one thing that I don't understand. Maybe I would want to hear your answers about the question.
Yeah, I think part of it is just this idea of that when we get together, right? I think this life, and we'll talk about that in the family episode maybe a bit more, but the Christian journey, let's say the discipleship journey, I think that's a better way of putting it. The discipleship journey has never ever, from the inception of God's kingdom, been about doing this alone or solo. I've heard people say, I don't need church or blah blah blah. I'm spiritual is a big thing now. I'm spiritual, but in reality, yes, you can. All of us have a spirit, right? That aspect of who we are. But the reality is that we were always meant to do life together, right? And the messiness that comes with doing life together is, I think, what people shy away from, or like creates that like rejection of community. Because one, I think sometimes people are just afraid of accountability, because there is accountability in community. You don't just get to do whatever you want or say whatever you want, right? And some people are not at the place that they're willing to confront that in themselves, right? I think the other part of it too is just this idea of like, in community you can't hide, right? That if you are living in real community, you have to be vulnerable, right? You have to be willing to say, here I am, and I don't have it all together. I don't have all the answers. But I think part of why worship can be so powerful is that when we get to that place that we're finally willing to take those barriers down and take those barriers down with each other, we recognize like there's a freedom in that, right? That really we have been almost imprisoning ourselves in this false facade that we have to look a certain way, be a certain way, have a certain attitude. And when we come before God and we say, that's not who I really am, Lord, and I want you to see me as I really am, we realize there is a God on the other end that is not ready to throw us in prison or jail, but he's actually waiting to set us free. And I think when people are free, that's why they can walk away and say things like, I just feel lighter, I just feel like at peace, I just feel this love and this joy, because in the presence of God, that's really what it's all about. But ironically, when hardship comes for, I think all of us, our natural inclination is to run away. You know what I mean? Run away from people, run away from God, isolate ourselves. But really, we're just kind of going back to that old prison then, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so what I was going to say is along the lines of what you said, but it was about like how where the Spirit of the Lord is, there's freedom. And usually when you're in a place where there's people around you, you're easily vulnerable with God. Because I think if you listen to why people listen to music, it's, it makes me feel a certain way. Or even, not even about like Christian gospel music, we're talking music in general. People are seeking music to feel something, which means even when it's written for God, it can make you feel something. And usually it brings and breaks down walls that you never thought you had built up. And it makes you vulnerable to the Spirit of God. Because the Spirit of God is everywhere, but once you are vulnerable and sensitive to it, it can move in different ways. And the moment you're singing and appreciating God, depending on the type of songs you're singing, it's like bringing you to a place where you are recognizing what might be wrong and recognizing what might need changing in your life. I think that's why it usually has a huge impact on people. Because very often it's brought you to a place where you never thought you'd be. And it's brought you to a place where you never understood why things happened the way they did. So I think that's
and like there's this book I'm listening actually, from N.T. Wright, as if in heaven is on earth as in heaven.
On earth as in heaven.
Yes, on earth as in heaven. So he talks about, I think he mentions in other books, but he talks about the idea of when Moses sends the the spies to the promised land, you
Yeah.
know. And then they come, or they go as a big group, you know. They come, this big group says, oh man, it's a bad people, they're this giant and everything. But then Caleb and Joshua, you know, they just bring these fruits and everything, you know, and then they show to the people, and people start eating those fruits, you know. And then it's just like, oh, the places we're going, you know, it's really this amazing thing, you know. And then it brings that in the perspective that art, you know, music, you know, worship, you know, it's this thing, you know, is as if those people, you know, bringing those fruits, you know, saying, try and eat it, you know. This is how amazing the life that is to come, you know. This is how amazing the life that is to come is going to be. And I just feel like that's actually really true, you know, because when you go to worship, you live there with a lot of, you know, energy, you know, a lot of motivation, like really, I really want to continue to be Christian, you know. So I just feel like it's God giving us a little bit of perspective of what is about to come, you know. And then it's just, so I like that perspective and what you guys were saying.
And I think that's a great segue into kind of what I want to talk about next, because there are other aspects of worship that I think are not thought of as worship, and we kind of discussed this before we started recording. But I think even the idea of what is Christian hope, I think most people, they really don't have a good idea of Christian hope. They think, okay, great, we'll be in like some disembodied clouds, like singing, you know, forever. But that is a very narrow definition of worship, is to sing songs to God. Now, obviously, I think that's part of it, but although I think you touched on a great thing, that all aspects of human life, of creativity, are an aspect, a reflection of God, right?
Yes.
That because He is the creator God. And so we go back to Genesis 1. We're going to do a biblical story series here, a few episodes in. And the whole premise that we're going to talk about there is this idea of image of God, right?
Yeah.
It says it 3 times. God made man and women in His image. So what does that mean? It means that we are meant to be a reflection of God's goodness into creation and reflecting creation's goodness back to God.
Yes.
So it's like a double-sided mirror, if you will. And so part of worship is not just singing songs, but it's taking the creation that God has given us authority over. Because even in the Genesis account again, it says that God gives man and women dominion over His creation. They are meant as His image bearers to rule over the creation on His behalf, right? So when we reflect God's love into creation, then creation will fit in its proper place, right? So the brokenness that we see now is this idea that when we don't reflect God's love, His goodness into creation, whether it be how we treat the earth, how we treat each other, how we, you know, manipulate things, how we you know, take things into our hands to benefit ourselves. All those are a broken reflection of an authority that God has given us. So when we live out our lives in alignment with God's love, so when we treat others with respect, right? When we actually do care about how we treat the environment, which may sound super weird to some of you, how we create, right? Are all things that we can, when put in its proper place, right? Meaning we're reflecting God's love into those things. They become a form of worship, right? And I think when we think of worship that way, it can transform everything that we do, because all of a sudden worship isn't just about going to a building and singing songs. Worship is about taking God's love wherever we're going, you know? And my final thought on that would just be, so like in the biblical story, the place where people would go to worship God was the temple, right? And that's why the temple was so important, because in the Old Testament, that was the place that you would experience God's presence. It wasn't like now where it's like, oh, you could go anywhere and everywhere, and that's where God's presence would be. That was the place where you would meet God. But Paul, taking up the ideas of what Jesus is saying in the New Testament, now says, with the Holy Spirit, you and I together become the temple of God. And I don't think we fully grasp what that means. It means if the Spirit of God is dwelling in us, wherever you and I go, that becomes a place for people to encounter the love of God. And they, in a way, that is an act of worship. When we love people with the love of God, and when they encounter the love of God in us, that is a form of worship, adoration, honoring, heart posture towards God. So there's my rant, right?
And I was watching this video on YouTube. It's this guy who Wisdom was he writes music and he's respected and everything, you know. And then he was just going, you know, through. He had this challenge. People were just challenging him, you know. They sent him a list of Christian songs, you know, like go and listen to this and bring some kind of perspective on this, you know.
Yeah.
And then he went and listened, you know. He did a live and then went and listened, you know. And then it was just so overwhelmed with how worship songs, you know, have these. For some reason, you know, the worship song, you know, just brings you some kind of energy, some kind of hope, you know, some kind of, you know, like this energy of just wanting to get up, you know, and wanting to say, hey man, it's worth living in this place, you know.
Yeah.
So I just feel like most of the times, you know, when people are going through a really hard time, you know, they run to worship songs, you know, because it just gives you that hope, you know, just gives that perspective of, you know what, even though I'm thinking about taking my life, I just feel like I can still give a chance to this place, you know, to this earth, as messed up as it is.
Yeah.
I think with like doing everything that you do with the perspective that the love of God lives within you, and it is a form of worship, is a new perspective to everything. Because the moment you realize that worship is in everything that you do, then everything you do will be done as worship.
Yeah.
Because if you don't know that, you just do everything because you can.
Yeah.
And when you have a godly perspective to the way you do life, people can see God through you. I don't know if that makes sense. And if you're living out that life, then it's easier to invite people to that life.
Yeah.
Because it's easier to speak to somebody and be like, hey, this is why I'm filled with joy. And this is why when I walk around, I can so easily communicate with other people and make people feel like family. It's because I'm living for one person and I'm living to show what he's done for me and reflect what he is to me and all that.
That's
so,
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and kind of to wrap up the last two questions and maybe wrap up the conversation, it's how can worship bring about transformation to our world, right? And then how can we think creatively about worship in order to reach people who maybe are hesitant to go to like a normal church setting, right? Because there's plenty of people at UB that I would put in that category maybe. And I think what can be so impacting about this, and we've talked about it, but think about it. In every single life, whether it's a BSc student, whether it's you're in the business department, imagine for a moment with me, if instead of just viewing your day as something to get through, right, something to suffer through, you took every opportunity to say, God, what do you have for me today? And you saw the student that was having a hard time, and you may be going through a hard time, but you just say, you know what? Let me just ask if I can pray for this person. Yeah. Maybe they just need to know that they're seen, right? And you don't have to be some spiritual giant to be someone that just cares. Maybe it's, you know what? I know my friend is hungry today. He's run out of money. Maybe I'll just buy him, a sandwich or whatever. But even those small things can become an act of love, which invites people into an atmosphere of worship to see who Jesus is, right? And obviously there has to become a point where they recognize that Jesus is behind that, but I don't think we always have to be like, I'm doing this because Jesus loves you. You better, you know what I mean? Like, that's not what God's asking us to do. Rather, he's wanting us as an act of worship to begin to operate in right relationship again, right? I think that's the heart posture, and then the conversations will come, right? God will begin to stir in people's hearts. And I think whether it's you work at immigration, and instead of being like everyone else there who doesn't care about their job, doesn't care about the foreigner, you say, you know what, I'm going to work really hard because these people, need an advocate for them. Maybe you work in the mines, like what we kind of talked about on the way here, and you say, yeah, I could just, do the bare minimum and get the paycheck, but people's lives are depending on me, and I need to do this the best I can. Yeah, I could just show up and be a doctor because it's super needed in Botswana, and I could just do whatever I need to do. But you know what? I'm going to work really hard. Yeah, I could be the guy who orders paper. Don't get you know what I mean? And just slack off and get the paycheck, because my dad got me this job. But instead, I want to reflect God's love by really working hard so that people aren't suffering because I'm not doing my job well. All of those things are things that we can think about that can transform our world. And I think one thing that I really admire about Botswana um, that I don't know if Botswana have thought about it this way, but the idea that they didn't fight a conflict, right, to win their independence, in the peace, in the idea of like, it almost feels like violence. They would rather have like a tyrant rule over them than to rise up in like a violent revolt. And some people may see that as weakness, but I see that as kingdom ethics, that we would rather suffer than go through a violent, because we know that it's not going to produce the life that we want, right? It's just going to produce chaos. It's going to create turmoil and death, and we don't want that. You know what I mean? And I think that's something that's super admirable about the culture that maybe people haven't even thought about it, but that's another kingdom way, that we don't have to be the violent people, right, to get what we want, to take so that we can have what we want. But anyways, I'll stop talking so you got this.
I have a story. So 2 years ago, my cousin and my brothers, we were building a kitchen out not attached to the house. We were just building a kitchen. It was just a decent sized building and everything, so we were making the concrete, the blocks, to build that. And we were just making them, and then my cousin, she just came like, hey, can I make one block? I wanna be part of this. And we just helped her everything, just do most of the job, most of heavy job, putting everything, beating and forming it, the block. And then the only thing that she has to do was just to lift the form, and then just leave the block there, and then she did that. She lifted, and she was so happy, like, yes, I did it. She wrote her name and everything, in the block. And when we were it was the only block when we were building, she like, please put it right at the entrance, and then don't cover it. She wanted her name written. We place it at the entrance and everything, and every time she goes in there, she feels like she was part of the people who built, that she contributed to that, And I just feel like that's the same perspective when it comes to heaven, it's not like we are building heaven, but we are contributing for that, So whatever we're doing now, is as if like we are my cousin, who did a little bit, but that block place, but for some reason, that thing, God is honoring whatever we're doing right now, So, but we get that, we get aligned, we get our feelings, and our emotion aligned when we are in worship. When we ask the question, God, who can I pray for now, And then God leads us, to people who really need, these prayers, I just felt like most of the times that I felt love towards someone, not romantic love and everything, But most of the times that I felt that, most of the time that I felt compassion, most of the times that I felt God, showed me a little bit of what someone is going through, was when my heart was in that worship moment, when I was just walking like, please God, show me someone, God would show me someone who was going through something, For some reason I would just feel a little bit of sadness, and I would go and talk to that person, just found out that the person is going through a lot of things, So I just feel like when we have that moment, we're giving God space, to come and use us to heal these people. But in that, God coming and using us, for some reason, God honors our acts, and then as if that block, God places the block.
That's really good. That's a beautiful picture for sure. You have any other maybe final thoughts?
I don't think there's anything I can add to what you've said.
Yeah.
I think you guys have said a lot. That's worth pondering on. Like everything you do, you should do as God, what can I do to honor you in this moment? Or what can I do for the next person to show them that this is your love?
Yeah, I think the only other thing that I just would want to add, even to what Paulo you were saying, is this idea that at the end of the day, we need the Holy Spirit's help, right? Like, it's not like we're telling you go out and try harder. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
But it's an invitation to say, God, what do you want to say today? Because He, it's crazy as it may sound, He will lead people into your life that you can speak life over. He'll direct you at times. And really, it's like the block, right? He's the one that's doing all the interior work.
Yeah.
But we're just coming and saying, God, can I have a little piece of what you're doing? And it's out of love that he invites us to see what he's doing constantly in the lives of others and inviting us to take part. And I think that in itself is maybe a great summary of what worship is that when we align our hearts with what God is trying to do, and we say, God, what are you saying? What are you doing? I want to be a part. God meets us in that moment, and we're not the same, right? He allows us to take part in what he's doing, and also it transforms us at the same moment. And that can happen in song, and that can happen in our everyday, just going to school for many of you, right?
Yeah.
So, awesome. I think this is a great discussion to maybe dive a little bit deeper into what worship is, and we'll plan to talk about family next time, guys.
Yep.
So, all right. Until
Nice.
then.
Yes.
All right.
Nice.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey everyone, this is just a brief reminder that if you've had a question come up from this discussion, or you just have a question in general that you want to ask us on the podcast, now is the time to do it. We want to make sure that we get these questions in for the end of the season Q&R, and we cannot wait to hear your guys' questions, to read them, and to be able to respond. But we can't do that unless you send them to us. So make sure if you're a part of Kingdom Movement already, you can personally message us your question, or you can send them via our Instagram, and we will make sure to read those, and hopefully we will answer your question on the season finale question and answer, question and response episode. All right, thanks guys.